In the Future Gardening exhibition, the Center for Genomic Gastronomy showed two different pieces, the perma gardening practices and the satellite seed savers. And both of them were looking at different ways that we can grow things on Earth and in space. The satellite seed savers looks at plants that have gone to space and tries to grow them here on Earth. Where the mission in space is to have full control. On Earth we question, like, what does it mean to try and control a growing environment? And the permagarden variations, that one's looking at perennial plants inspired by Stephen Barstow and his garden, and trying to look at food forest ingredients and how we might grow them here in the Amstel Park. And so we've essentially created a catalogue of food forest plants that you can hopefully taste next year. So they started off in the exhibition with signage and information, and at the end of the exhibition we had a procession for these plants to enter into our garden.
Welcome! Thank you for helping us move the plants. And now the moment of truth. Choose the plants. Choose where it should go.
So this is the Genomic Gastronomy garden, and here we've been experimenting with various plants, and for the exhibition Future Gardening we decided to get a range of perennial plants, which are basically plants that come back year after year, and this was inspired by an ongoing project we have with a gardener called Stephen Barstow, where he explores edible perennial plants in Norway, and we were interested in how he can eat in a relatively difficult, cold environment year-round vegetarian. And so in the process of making a film about his garden, we also thought we could incorporate some of his practices and principles into this garden. So inspired by him, we bought a range of perennial plants, and that's what we've planted here in the circle in our garden here. So there's a range of interesting plants here, and they're all representative plants of what people might grow in a food forest, and we're very interested in food forests as a potential future form of agriculture, both on a large scale but also on a small scale. So here we're testing it out, and you can think of it kind of as a catalogue of food forest ingredients in this circle around the main tree that was here before we arrived.
My name is Theun, Karelse, and one of the three artist gardens is sort of my garden. It's the floating garden in the big pond, and it's made of bamboo structures. And these in the show I used the bamboo structures of last year. It's a floating garden because in 2001 the otter returned to Amsterdam, and it came back in a period of extreme drought in Holland. So for me it really felt like a message, like this iconic water creature in a way asking us to renew our relationship to the water. These floating gardens are a way to be, in a way, immersed in the world of the otter. They're not made for the otter. It's more like you want to get to know this ecosystem, this biome. And a water garden is literally immersive. You're in it, and you're sort of, let's say, the bottom part of your body is really in another sort of world, and there are different creatures in that world. There are shoals of fish that pass by. There's a little frog maybe that swims by. There's hoverflies. Dragonflies that sort of are with you. And why I'm doing is more to get in touch. So as a gardener, it becomes your practice. You start to learn about these water plants, this whole biome, and I try to, and you need different clothes, so you need different tools, so the whole thing develops, and it gets character. And with these tools and with these things, you try to really get a sense of what is the quality or the wisdom that these creatures have. And with the otter, that is maybe what I asked a lot of people, and so it's like you say, if an owl is wise, what is an otter? And people say, well, it's particular about an otter is that it doesn't need much infrastructure. It doesn't need a dam. It leaves part of its food behind. It's sort of not very attached to things. So I try to make the whole process of making this water garden in the same spirit. You don't need, the bamboo only lasts a year, and then I let go of it and just get new bamboo and make it again, and try to get into this philosophy of the otter. Because future gardening, I think we're looking for new ways to relate to landscape, and I think that's what I'm trying to do.
As part of the Future Gardening exhibition, we came with three lines of research. First of all, here in the front we have a speculative coral reef. And for the openings event, we invited marine ecologist Lisa Becking. She's working at Naturalis Biodiversity Center in Wageningen University. And as a marine biologist, she comes across species that haven't seen before, and she's in a position to give them a name. We invited her to have a small session on speculative taxonomy, trying to come up with a name for these hybrid species that represent sweet land thinking and salt sea thinking together in one piece. Then moving on to the next part of the exhibition, we brought this installation from the International Architecture Biennial in Rotterdam, and this work circling around speculative botany contains a lot of drawings of plants that might be growing in our living environment in the future. It is questioning gardening, it is questioning how we value plants. It is trying to change the perspective from a plant perspective. Then we move on to the research table that is about an ecological rotation starting from Mrs. Bax's.
In the shadow garden.
In the shadow garden, yes. The research table is a miniature of the shadow garden, and it's containing all different lines of research, writing, drawings, paintings. And it's all about, what is your name? What is my name? It's about name giving. It's about breaking open taxonomy. How can we come up with a classification system of a taxonomy of relationships?
This exhibition really begins from working in the garden, working by studying the garden, learning from the garden, and questioning how do we take instructions from the garden? How can we become gardeners that garden by taking instructions? This starts already with a problem of having a garden or having stewardship over a garden, which presents a question also, how do we relate to the plants in the garden or the garden itself? And one important way of relating is by name giving. So in the first place, the name was given Shadow Garden by the Onkruidenier. And then afterwards, when I started visiting the garden, I realized there was plants that I felt particularly drawn to, that I wanted to spend more and more time with. And one of them was Mrs. Bax's. And Mrs. Bax's name came about in a drawing exercise by Samar, where I was drawing together with, in front of the Bax's bush, our 400-year-old bush in the garden, the oldest one in Amstel Park. And the name Mrs. Bax's came into a poem that I was writing in front of her. And engaging in this relationship with her, where we're feeding her crushed eggshells, where we're visiting her every time we step into the garden, where we're thinking about the relationships that she's engaged with, but also the sadness of losing a lot of her family members.
So, Mrs. Bax's is the last Bax's in the entire Amstel Park. When we visited the garden for the first time, there were many Baxes, but due to the caterpillars eating all the green leaves, the park managers have been cutting them away. They are gone, and Mrs. Bax's is the last Bax's of the entire park. We are going to fight for her. We are going to treat her with a lot of care. We are going to, Samar has been really, spending time with Mrs. Bax's, lending her your body and your organs, really trying to...
Made a very interesting observation a few weeks ago as well, that Mrs. Bax was probably sad. And it really struck a chord with me, because it's a kind of a feature of her life story that I tend to overlook, that she lost 11 or 12 of her family members in quick succession.
It's a big tragedy. And during the exhibition, I visited very interesting gardens, walled gardens in Japan, in Kyoto, where I studied the possibility of having a spiritual relationship with a walled garden.
Future gardening for us, I think, is quite a long list of things. One of them would be, what does it look like to be a gardener in the future? What kind of characteristics should a gardener have?
Yeah, and I think realizing with tools and plants in my hands, standing in the garden, I feel like I am not the one to decide to change anything to the ecosystem that I am visiting. I started to question that and learn about how I can listen to the ecosystem that was created without me and how I can be in service of all the species there.